Hey, Horse Center fans. Matt and I are back with another exciting edition of the show. Matt, this season has not taught us a whole lot yet about the three-year-old males. We need to see things happen in the summer. What do we got coming up?
We're going to do a rundown of the top 3-year-olds that are still in training, where they're going to be running next, looking at the fields of the big races still to come, the Jim Dandy, the Haskell, the Indiana Derby, the Travers.
All sorts of stuff, Matt. Code of Honor last week, game winner this week. Watch it now, all right here on Horse Center. Welcome to another edition of Horse Center, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I have the excellent pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm okay, Brian. I'm a little tired. I've been traveling all weekend. I was in Canada this morning, and now I'm at home because we got to get Horse Center out to the folks.
Yeah, there's no excuses, Matt. Horse Center must go on, and so must this 3-year-old male division, Matt. What did the spring teach us about the 3-year-old males? I'm not sure if we have too many answers right now. Hopefully, we'll learn a lot more about them in the summer. This has been when the Eclipse Award's been won, several years that weren't Triple Crown years, especially, Matt. And I think this summer is going to play a huge role in deciding who the 3-year-old male champion is after a little bit of a jumble during the Triple Crown. Matt, it started, the second half for these 3-year-old males started Saturday at Belmont Park. It was a big Stars and Stripes festival card, of course, and Code of Honor did his thing in the Dwyer Stakes. What did you think about his performance coming back from the Kentucky Derby?
No confusion there, Brian Zipsy. There was only one thing you could think about that performance and that is that you had to be impressed. It was everything that trainer Shug McGaughey was looking for, that he was hoping Code of Honor would turn in a big performance, and he did. He was in last place through the early going with a good pace out there for him. And when he was set down to rally for home, that's exactly what he did. Nice straight path and just blew by the rest of the field.
Yeah, and I would even take it a step farther, Matt. It wasn't very fast-paced for him back in last early, so he did a lot of the work. He also didn't have much of a hole to go through, but he made that hole happen, and very impressive. Of course, this was one turn. Before the race, I said how much I like Code of Honor. I thought he was going to be a second half of the year kind of horse, and one of the things I said, Matt, was one turn, two turns. I think he's a good horse at what we saw in the Dwyer, which was the 1-turn mile. Now he's got to prove it that he can win big races around 2 turns. Shug is talking about probably a double header at Saratoga with both the Jim Dandy and the Travers. If not, he'll just go straight to the Travers. But he's certainly a major player after this. But I will caution people, that was 1 turn, and that wasn't the strongest of competition, so things will get tougher for Code of Honor, but certainly a major player, would you say, as we move forward?
Yeah, no doubt, and I certainly would prefer to see him go 2 turns in the Jim Dandy before diving into what looks like it's going to be a very big field and a pretty deep field for the Travers.
Yeah, we would imagine that would be so, but first things first, Matt, we're going to work our way towards the Travers. Code of Honor was Saturday. We got some more top-notch 3-year-olds. Right now, they're kind of separate from each other. But, of course, we're all probably converging to bigger races coming up soon, the Haskell, the Jim Dandy, and then ultimately the Travers, and maybe even on our way to the Breeders' Cup Classic. But first, we got to talk about this week. There's one in California, and there's one in Indiana. Matt, let's start a little bit local to me. Indiana Grand, the $500,000 Indiana Derby will be Saturday night. Looks like they might get a pretty sizable field. Always Mining's going to try to bounce back after his winning streak ended with a couple losses. Long Range Toddy hasn't won since his Rebel win. Math Wizard ran a very good race in the Ohio Derby last time, but all eyes will be on the Brett Calhoun train, Mr. Money, Matt.
Yeah, it looks like a little matchup of horses that ran in the Triple Crown races or were on the Derby Trail, and the horses that weren't in the highlights early in the year in the springtime. But you're right, Mr. Money is going to be a big favorite, and deservedly so. Trainer Brett Calhoun decided not to go to the Haskell, to stay closer to home. And I think that's what he said when, Brian, we were down there at Churchill Downs when he won the Matt Winn right after that race. That's what Calhoun thought he was going to do. He was going to stay closer to home. Good money in the Indiana Derby. He can still run out of his stall and just day ship over to Indiana Grand. He's going to be a big favorite, and deservedly so.
Yeah, less than a couple hours from his home base here in Louisville, Kentucky, Churchill Downs. The son of Golden Sense, Matt, has run some very, very big races. In fact, if you look at the last couple, I don't know if any 3-year-old has paired as impressive wins as Mr. Money. That's kind of saying a lot, because there have been some good back-to-back races for 3-year-olds. But honestly, that's how impressive he was in winning the Pat Day Mile on Kentucky Derby weekend. And then more recently in front of us there in the Matt Winn last time. Matt, he just toyed with those horses. Now his best races have come at Churchill Downs. His best races have come at a mile and a 16th or shorter. He's going to get a mile and 16th on Saturday in the Indiana Derby. I think he takes his Churchill Downs games up to Indiana Grand and does really well against a bunch of grade 2 kind of 3-year-olds. Matt, Long Range Toddy's a nice horse. Math Wizard, I expect Always Mining to do better after having a tough trip in the Easy Goer. But Mr. Money, yeah, he's the horse to beat. And if you don't know Mr. Money, if you didn't watch those races that weren't on the Triple Crown Trail, like Matt said, in the Pat Day Mile and the Matt Winn, watch him, because Mr. Money certainly is a horse to watch, Matt. And remember, we saw him at Churchill Downs before he ever ran last year as a good-looking, unraced son of Golden Sense. Speaking of good 2-year-olds, Matt, of course, then we can talk about Game Winner, because Game Winner is making his return, first start since the Kentucky Derby, Saturday at Los Alamitos.
That is right. At Los Al Derby coming up this weekend. Of course, we think back, Game Winner was one of the big names on the road to the Kentucky Derby. He's had a couple second places heading into the Derby. Ended up with the 5th place finish in the Derby. Doesn't have a win this year. He's got some time off. Don't think he's going to face much of a field in here, Brian Zipsy. At this point, who knows who they're going to gather up to get that race to go. But, at this point, in the middle of July, it's time for Game Winner to come up with a victory.
Yeah, now Game Winner, of course, was the undefeated 2-year-old champion last year, Matt. And, a lot of people still like Game Winner. I write articles about these 3-year-olds, and Game Winner is a name that keeps coming up. People still are on the Game Winner bandwagon. He's been working very well out in California, by the way. And, Matt, if you look at the 3 races, I know you're a big fan of Omaha Beach, and he ran every bit the equal to Omaha Beach in the Rebel Stakes. Second to Roadster in the Santa Anita Derby. And then in the Kentucky Derby, he finished 6th, was placed 5th, disappointing. But on the other hand, he was inexplicably so far out of that Kentucky Derby early. He was just way, way, way back, and he's never done anything like that before. So he actually made up a lot of ground wide in the Derby. But he's 0 for 3 in 2019. Let's get down to brass tacks, Matt. He's 0 for 3 in 2019. He's got to show it now. You're right. Much like Code of Honor, I think he is finding a pretty beatable field, whatever it may be, a short field at Los Al on Saturday. So we expect to see a Game Winner win on Saturday, I think, Matt.
Yeah, certainly.
All right. So those are the races Saturday. Mr. Money, Game Winner, big favorites. They're going to move forward probably with wins on Saturday. At least that's what Matt and I expect. But then the really bigger races start the following week. We're going to have a Haskell preview next week. But let's talk about this Haskell a little bit now. And I think the conversation has to start with the Pegasus Stakes over the local surface there at Monmouth Park.
Yeah, that's for sure, folks. You remember that race? It was Maximum Security making his first start since running in the Triple Crown races. That week, trainer Jason Service was a little bit unsure about whether he was going to run his horse or not, a little bit not sure whether Maximum Security was completely ready or not, and maybe it turned out that way in the Pegasus because King for a Day, an improving 3-year-old for Todd Pletcher, ran him down in the stretch and looked very impressive in there. Maximum Security didn't miss any training time after that, and seems to be back to himself and training in a normal pattern that Jason Service uses. So no doubt the big storyline for the Haskell will be the rematch between Maximum Security and King for a Day. But when you're talking about the Haskell, Brian, you got to be wondering who's Bob Baffert sending, as he has owned the Haskell in the last decade or so.
Yeah, Bob Baffert will be represented, of course, in the Haskell. But let's get back to that Pegasus, Matt. Maximum Security, of course, was an overwhelming favorite. Everybody wanted to see the horse that many thought was the best horse in the Kentucky Derby, and still undefeated as far as getting to the wire first after that Kentucky Derby. So he was just an overwhelming favorite in the Pegasus, and he got beat. People still expect Maximum Security to bounce back. He was hounded by King for a Day for much of the Pegasus, and finally King for a Day ran him down. Now, the real wild card maybe of this whole division, Matt, is King for a Day. People, especially the people that thought Maximum Security was a champion in waiting, they now have kind of got onto the King for a Day bandwagon, and it might be for real. It's hard to tell now. He was a very lightly raced 3-year-old, but a well-liked 3-year-old. He ran 4th in a huge field in the Kentucky Jockey Club last year, and only his 3rd start after coming out of a maiden win. Son of Uncle Mo, like you said, trained by Todd Pletcher, is 2 for 2 this year. The horse he beat in his first race, the Sir Barton, went up and ran a pretty good race in the Queen's Plate. And now he comes to Monmouth, and he outdoes Maximum Security. It wasn't a case of Maximum Security really getting tired and him just running by late. He hounded him, and he went by. So in my mind, Maximum Security should be better in the Haskell, but for my mind, King for a Day is a horse we have no idea how good he really is.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you said he's won 2 in a row, just like Mr. Money's won 2 races in a row. And but with these 3-year-olds, it's been unusual enough, Brian, for any of them to win 2 races in a row, let alone 3 in a row. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with King for a Day, with Mr. Money in their next starts.
Yeah, that's true. And while I think Mr. Money has been the more impressive of the two, King for a Day has a win over Maximum Security. So we get the rematch in the Haskell. But like you mentioned, we get Bob Baffert, and I tell you who Baffert's sending, Matt. It's Mucho Gusto. We know he's sending Mucho Gusto, and Mucho Gusto, was a nice 3-year-old. He ran some good races along the way late last year and earlier this year. But then I think he took a step forward last time in the Affirmed. Santa Anita Derby winner Roadster was in there, and first race since the Kentucky Derby for him as well. He really was no match for Mucho Gusto down the stretch in the Affirmed. So another horse with a good turn of speed, Mucho Gusto for Bob Baffert. He's a threat to those 2 Pegasus horses.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. He's going to ship across the country. No doubt Jimmy Barnes, Baffert's assistant, will be in charge of him out when he comes here to New Jersey. And hey, he's a horse that might finally be putting the pieces together.
Absolutely. And I think if you're running down the likely field for the Haskell, Matt, the 4th biggest name is a horse by the name of Joevia. I didn't like his chances in the Belmont Stakes, but honestly, he ran a very big race. The race before that, he won a minor stake at Monmouth Park. So Joevia comes in with a stakes win at Monmouth Park and then a very good 3rd in the Belmont. More speed, though, for the Haskell.
Yeah, and again, there's another horse that wasn't really ready for the Triple Crown and the road to the Kentucky Derby, but come May, he's starting to run really well.
Yeah, And what do those horses have in common, Matt? Maximum Security, King for a Day, Mucho Gusto, Joevia. They all like to be on or near the lead. So I'm going to throw one more name in the Haskell. I think he ran a sneaky good race in the Preakness, and he ran some good races down at Oaklawn Park, Matt. I'm just going to throw Laughing Fox out there as a horse who, if there's a lot of speed, if the pace is hot in the Haskell, Laughing Fox may be a horse to look at in the big one at the Shore in a week and a half.
Yep. Well, we'll know more next Wednesday. Not this coming Wednesday. The Wednesday after, when the draw is scheduled for the Haskell.
And we'll be talking about it on Horse Center, our Haskell preview show. All right. So the Haskell is July 20th, a little over a week and a half. The week after that is the Jim Dandy, Matt. And we've talked about the Dwyer, the Indiana Derby, the Los Al Derby, the Haskell. I think right now the Jim Dandy looks like the best immediate prep. Of course, it's a prep for the Travers, but it's the best race, I think, top to bottom of 3-year-olds as far as their next race. And what we could see in the Jim Dandy would be a field like Tacitus, a horse who ran well in both the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont without winning, Tampa Bay Derby and Wood Memorial winner. War Will, the Preakness winner, won some stakes at Fairgrounds as well. Owendale, I'm liking Owendale a lot. I know he didn't win by a lot in the Ohio Derby, but impressive in the Lexington, and I thought he ran a really good race. Went third behind War of Will, but against the bias and outside. Code of Honor coming back from the Dwyer, probably. Global Campaign, Matt, the Peter Pan winner. This list of horses for the Jim Dandy is looking very interesting.
It is a very, very strong field, without a question. All the races that we have mentioned coming up this weekend and in the future, this is certainly the most stacked field in there. You mentioned Global Campaign, very talented horse from Sagamore Farms, last seen winning the Peter Pan, had some problems with his feet that requires a lot of special attention. And that's always got to put question marks in your head going into a big race. But a very talented horse. You throw in Owendale, as you mentioned, War of Will, the winner of the Preakness, and impressive on the Kentucky Derby Trail. Code of Honor, you mentioned Tacitus. That's going to be a good one in the Jim Dandy. I really like this July series now with the Haskell a week before the Jim Dandy. So you got big 3-year-old races on consecutive weekends.
Absolutely, Matt. Yeah, the Jim Dandy will be probably producing a Travers favorite. Of course, if Maximum Security wins off in the Haskell or there's a huge performance in the Haskell, I could be wrong there, but win this race and there's a good chance you go to the Travers as the horse to beat. War of Will certainly could take the lead in the division with a win in the Jim Dandy, again, depending a little bit on Maximum Security. Tacitus is not far behind in this race as well, but Owendale, Global Campaign, Code of Honor, those horses are all primed to make runs at a 3-year-old champion, and it starts in the Jim Dandy. Global Campaign for trainer Stanley Huff, you mentioned the foot problems, but if he's healthy, the son of Curlin could be any kind. And I really do feel that way about Owendale, still an improving horse from the Brad Cox barn. But after the Dwyer, Matt, I think Code of Honor is coming back strong with that prep under his girth right now. And if I had to pick one horse that would be the horse to beat in the Jim Dandy, it could well be the son of Noble Mission for Shug McGahee, Code of Honor. How about you? Do you have an early horse in the Jim Dandy you like best?
Like you said, it's a really nice field in there, and I don't know. Maybe it'll be Tacitus's day in there, but I think you're right. The winner of Jim Dandy is probably going to become the division leader. But if Maximum Security runs a big one in Haskell, which is certainly possible, it'll be interesting to see.
So we have the Jim Dandy on July 27th, Matt. Actually, the day before that is the Curlin Stakes, and there's been some good horses over the years that have run in the Curlin Stakes, even a Travers winner. As good as the Jim Dandy field is, you might have some kind of dark horses for the Travers coming out of the Curlin, and I think one horse I want to mention, I just want to throw out there. I don't know if he's the type of horse that can go all the way, pull an Arrogate and go all the way through and become a champion here. But Looking at Bikinis is a son of Looking at Lucky for trainer Chad Brown. Matt, he had one race last year too at Belmont Park. It was impressive. He's only had one race this year. It was a long awaited return. He came back less than 2 weeks ago, and it was a nice allowance win for the son of Looking at Lucky. So 2 for 2 lifetime. I kind of expect him not to be in the Jim Dandy, but to be in the Curlin. I think Looking at Bikinis could be a horse to watch as we move forward in this 3-year-old male crop that we're talking about, the summer of the 3-year-olds, Matt. Of course, the Kentucky Derby winner, the horse that got put up, Country House, it looks like he's probably out for the year, as is the Belmont winner, Sir Winston. They're both at least on the shelf for now, so we won't be seeing them in the Travers. But pretty much every other horse we talked about through this Dwyer, Indiana Derby, Los Al, Haskell, and Jim Dandy, and even the Curlin, could be leading up to a really good Travers. So the Travers is the big one of the summer, Matt. It's August 24. These preps leading up to the Travers will be real telltales who will be the favorite in the Travers. But as wide open as this division is, maybe a mile and a quarter at Saratoga, we've seen some big upsets in the Travers over the year, and certainly that could happen again this year. But it's an interesting group of horses coming from all these different places: Indiana, California, Kentucky, Monmouth, and of course the Jim Dandy field. So the Travers will be the race we're watching on August 24, and could decide the 3-year-old champion. Although, Matt, there's one good horse that we do expect back. I know you want to talk a little bit about the horse that won those stakes races at Arkansas earlier this year.
Yeah, Omaha Beach is still out there, Brian. After his victory in the Arkansas Derby, Omaha Beach had beaten all of the other important rivals and was on his way to being the favorite in the Derby. And they had to do that throat operation on him, which usually horses come back from fairly quickly, but Omaha Beach, it's taken him longer to recover. I think they have targeted a race out in California at the end of August, the Shared Belief, which obviously will have him not racing in the Travers with that marvelous field that you described. But if he comes back and can get into good order and have a good prep in the Shared Belief, who knows where we'll see him out there. There's a couple other restricted races for 3-year-olds that he could head to.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. They did mention also the Jerkins, the Jerkins Memorial as a possibility, but I think it is much more likely. The Jerkins Memorial, of course, used to be the King's Bishop, that 7-furlong race on Travers Day. But I do think it's much more likely that Omaha Beach will be placed into the race you're talking about. Hopefully by then, we're still talking a good month and a half from now. That's the Shared Belief at Del Mar. And then I think from there, Matt, he has to go against some tougher competition, probably only 2 races before the Breeders' Cup Classic. But a lot of people liked Omaha Beach. He was the Kentucky Derby favorite before his scratch a few days out. So Omaha Beach, we're all looking forward to the return of him. Maybe he spices this summer of 3-year-olds up the day after the Travers at Del Mar Park. All right, folks, this division is the glamour division of America's racing, but we're just we're trying to make heads or tails of it. There's so many interesting horses, or so many horses that haven't put a number of big wins together. Will it be Code of Honor, Mr. Money Game winner this week? Maxim Security getting that ring match against King for a Day. All those good horses pointing for the Jim Dandy. Maybe it'll be a horse who just pops up out of nowhere, like Looking at Bikinis, or maybe we're just waiting for the return of Omaha Beach to take over this division. One way or the other, we'll be watching it all here on Horse Center. Now, what'd you think of the past weekend of racing? There were some big performances. Concrete Rose was my star of the week, the 3-year-old filly winning the Belmont Oaks in impressive fashion.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. Concrete Rose should have been the star. She was the horse that you and I expected to win, and did win. There were an awful lot of upsets though that weekend in New York. I guess Chad Brown can't win them all, and there were plenty of good horses out there. Catholic Boy ran into a juggernaut in the Suburban, and just got beat by Preservationist in there, but that doesn't count Catholic Boy out from there with that second place performance.
Absolutely. Preservationist ran a huge race, and maybe he throws his name in the ring as one of the top handicap horses out there for Centennial Farms. Give Catholic Boy another shot after his second place finish in his second start of the year, switching back to dirt again. Henley's Joy pulled an upset in the Belmont Derby, finally got a good trip and won there. Jaywalk finally got back on her winning ways in the Delaware Oaks, and she did it by a long shot, a big margin in the Delaware Oaks. Nice to see Jaywalk back for trainer John Service. And of course, overseas, we had Enable doing it again, the Magical, in her first race since the Breeders' Cup Turf. So a lot of good performances last week. Concrete Rose, though, Matt, what a 3-year-old turf filly she's become. I want to thank our sponsor, Derby Wars, the best contest site out there. Also, folks, I want to remind you, if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel here on Horse Racing Nation. Hey, Matt Schiffman, 40-year Matt Schiffman, Finger Lakes Matt Schiffman. Can I get a parting shot from you?
Yeah, it's been a busy week. A lot of traveling, a couple of racetracks, headed to Saratoga on Wednesday. But of course, I want to thank our producer, Brett Workman, for putting together the show.
Yeah, and I was out at Ellis Park yesterday. It's been a long week for me too. Ellis Park yesterday, that was a great time out there in Henderson, Kentucky. And I will be heading to Saratoga to see you out there at the spa pretty soon as well. So I look forward to that. Folks, thanks for watching. Next week, we will really focus on the big one down at the Jersey Shore, the Haskell Invitational. This week, let's see what Mr. Money and Game Winner can do, respectively, in California, Indiana. We hope you enjoyed our 3-year-old Males of the Summer show. It's going to be an interesting summer. Watch it all right here on Horse Center.